Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. Today I'm going to be talking about goals and objectives with your bonsai. Over 25 years ago, I started this Portulacaria afra forest, and I always had the goal in mind to design the trees to look like the giant African Baobab tree. And 25 years later, I'm getting closer to that goal. The main tree here in the forest is getting that appearance, both in the trunk and the branch style. And it's been a long-term goal, and it's been very rewarding. These trees aren't very tall. If you look at my hand here, it's about the height of my hand. And I've cut back these trees many times, let them grow, cut them back, let them grow. And I think it's worth it. I think having a long-term goal in mind and trying to achieve that goal is one of the fun things of bonsai. It's one of the goals that make bonsai interesting, is trying to achieve those goals. And I try and have a plan for all of my trees. Most of them have a good plan in place, and trying to achieve that goal that you have in mind for your bonsai is one of the factors in driving your techniques you use on the tree. So this tree, I've let it grow out, really long branches, cut it back hard, let it grow out again, cut it back hard. And, it helped me achieve that thick trunk and the short height of the tree. I've studied the proportions of baobab trees, and I continue to do that to try and make these trees more and more realistic as miniature baobabs. There's several trees in this planting back here. I want to eventually take this style of tree and have it reproduced in miniature in the background to give depth to the planting. So those trees in the background still need work. They're, slowly getting there, but there's definitely lots I can improve on this planting. Here is a look at the largest tree in the forest, and you can see, the trunk is getting good. I've scarred up the trunk to get the baobab-like texture on the trunk. It's getting a good root base on it, and the branch structure continues to improve. When I've been growing it out, I've had to do a lot of hard cuts, hard prunes on it, and there's a lot of stubs on it, transitions that don't look so good. So that's something I can work on in the future, is smoothing out all those transitional areas. I think the branch structure is slowly getting there. I need to thicken up a lot of these trunks that are coming forward here. But, the overall shape is reminiscent of a baobab tree. For me, studying the trees as they exist in nature and then trying to duplicate them in miniature is what I try and achieve in bonsai. That's my style, where I try and make all my trees look like miniature replicas of trees you would see in nature. For me, this is what I'm trying to achieve in bonsai, is miniature replicas of full-size trees you'd see in nature. So I'm always going online looking at pictures of baobab trees, studying the structure of them, the trunk texture, the branch structure, the proportions. And I'm always trying to improve these trees. And I think that's, for me, what drives me in bonsai, is to be able to look at this tree and it feels like I'm standing under a giant baobab tree. I will probably never be able to visit a giant old baobab tree. So for me, this is as close as I get. I get to look at my bonsai version, and it gives me that feeling that I'm looking at an ancient baobab tree in nature. And that's what I like about bonsai, is getting that feeling that you're there looking at a mature tree that you maybe would never see in your lifetime. I find when a tree looks like its full-size counterpart in nature, I can relate to the tree. I can imagine myself sitting underneath the tree looking up at it. My preference in bonsai is always to try and get a full-size tree reduced in miniature, duplicating the branch structure, the natural characteristics of the tree. And those are the trees I relate to because I can see pictures of them, I can see them in nature, and I can relate to those trees. Some of the more exaggerated bonsai styles, as I've said before, I don't get the point of them. They're not relatable. They're just technical exercises, and that's why I try and make all my trees look like realistic trees shrunk down. And it's a tough goal to achieve. You have to really study the structure of trees, and I encourage everyone to do that. That's why on my channel I always show pictures of good examples of full-size trees, and they're all from the internet. You can look them up yourselves, and I encourage everyone to study pictures of trees because nature to me is the most, it's the most beautiful form of a tree you can get. A tree that's purely natural, growing in nature, and to duplicate that style in miniature, I think takes the beauty of nature and miniaturizes it down. And so that's why I try and grow all my trees in that naturalistic style. I think for bonsai to become an art form, it can't just be a technical exercise. It's got to create an emotional feeling to the viewer, and I find those natural style trees do that more than the bonsai styles. I consider those trees more of a technical exercise, and as I've said before, I always question why do people style the trees to look like bonsai and not full-size trees. And I can't answer that question because I see it shows that the trees that people are attracted to are the trees that look like trees. The trees that they kind of just walk by and are the trees that look like bonsai. And I think it's because they can't relate to it. It's a bizarre form of a tree, and those trees don't really exist in nature, so they're unrelatable. There's no sense of scale to the tree. You can't picture yourself walking underneath it. You'll never see a tree like that in nature. There are bizarre forms of trees in nature, and you'll find them on the internet. There'll be trees that are windblown, or trees that are growing in pockets of soil on mountains that have very twisted and bizarre shapes. And it doesn't mean your bonsai has to be boring or an exact duplicate of a typical tree. There's some bizarre forms of trees that you can try and copy in your miniature styles, but I think the main objective of bonsai should be to evoke emotion in the viewer, to either create a sense of a giant tree, a sense of scale, or a tree that the viewer can relate to. This is a Portulacaria afra forest, and you could argue, well, Portulacaria afras don't grow like this in nature. They don't grow to look like Baobab trees. But this is imitating a tree you would see in nature. And I've seen, Chinese elms grown in the Baobab style, and they can look fantastic. So it still is kind of duplicating a tree in nature. Sometimes you use different species. Yeah, that's my objectives. My goals and objectives in bonsai is to create, images of full-size majestic trees, or they don't have to be majestic. They can be full-size little trees duplicated in miniature. Another goal and objective of my bonsai is to try and get all the features of the full-size tree into small a form as possible. So I think with bonsai, the larger you grow the tree, you can grow, the leaves start looking smaller on a large tree. You can maybe get more characteristics in a larger tree, but there's a certain point where a tree becomes too big. It becomes awkward to handle, and I try and minimize having trees that are hard to handle. I've always said my rule is it has to be able to fit in the back of my car. I don't want giant trees that I have to lay on the side and have 2 or 3 people help carry around. they become difficult to repot and transport. And part of bonsai is that it's grown in a pot. It's portable. Otherwise, you just grow your tree in the ground and shape it. It's portable. The pot becomes part of the art form, the display, everything. So yeah, I try and achieve all the goals of creating that full-size tree image into a tree that's as small as possible. So what will this forest look like 10, 20 years into the future? Well, I hope, the trunk continues to thicken up. I refine the branch structure, getting all the branches flowing without kind of stumps, getting taper into the branches. I'll keep studying baobab trees and work on, miniaturizing all the characteristics found on giant baobabs. So it'll be quite fun. I can see maybe someday getting a larger pot for this forest, spreading the trees out more. But it'll change in the future for sure, that all bonsai do. But I hope that it doesn't get too large. My goal is not to grow this tree twice as large as it is now. I'm going to try and keep it a small tree, the small forest, something I can carry. And I think I can do it. I mean, it's 25 years old now, and I've managed to keep the trees quite small and compact, and I think I can continue to do that for another 10, maybe 20 years. It depends how long I live, I guess. And then hopefully someone else will take it over and continue to grow it. Speaking of goals, I want to show you my wisteria, and the tree seems to have a mind of its own. Let me show you what's happening with it. So here is my wisteria. I gave it a really good root pruning this year, getting a really nice radial root base on it. I was really happy with the root system. And then I've got kind of a central trunk and a couple of branches growing up. And then wisteria is a vine, and you can see it's growing up, and the three leaders have joined here and they're twisting around each other, and the leader grows up into the structure of the greenhouse here. And I think I've taken this leader out here and put it up into the air probably 10 times already, and every time I come out here it's always back into the growing into the structure. So somehow the plant just knows it wants support up there. It wants to grow up beside something. But the thing that puzzles me is how these three branches grew up and then decided that they would join in the middle here and twist around each other. It's almost like they have eyes or something, and they can see branches or sense branches around them, but I know they don't. At least, I don't think they're sensitive or can determine where other things are. So I'm wondering what causes this phenomena. Is it, the programming of the tree that, when you have branches that they just tend to grow back towards the center, or they just somehow know the position of the vines and they grow around each other? I don't know, but it's very interesting. So I'm going to untangle them because I want these branches to spread out. I don't want them converging at the top here and growing and fusing together into a single vine. So I just thought I'd show you that it's very interesting. Plants definitely can have a mind of their own, that's for sure. So I will untangle them, and then we'll check in on them later on and see if they have wrapped themselves around each other once again in the future. So they're separated now. I think they're going to find each other again, but we'll see. So they're separated now. We'll see if they continue to wrap around each other in the far future. I was going to repot my large European buckthorn today, but it's raining outside. I can't do it in the greenhouse here because it's too large a tree. And it's supposed to rain again tomorrow, so it might be 3 days until I get to that large European buckthorn to repot it. So in the meantime, I've been bringing up trees from the basement, my temperate trees, citrus trees, my Sarissa, my Portulacaria, afra. A lot of the jades will be coming up, some of the succulents, and my miniature, my little micro bonsai. They'll all be coming up here into the greenhouse soon because the temperatures outside are at the moment staying above freezing at nighttime, and in the greenhouse here I can always put the heat on a little bit at night to keep them warm. So that's what I'll be doing. I'll be bringing trees up from the basement, and the repotting of the large buckthorn will be coming once the weather gets a little better. I keep my Portulacaria afras cool over the winter, giving them a rest period. They grow a little bit. You can see there's sort of some yellowy indoor leaves. Some of the shoots have put a little bit of growth on, but very little. They basically stay dormant the entire winter, which is good. I think the rest period's good for them. You don't have any insect problems over the winter, and they don't use a lot of water. So it's very, very low maintenance in the winter, this tree. I basically put it in the basement. I water it maybe once every 2 weeks. And other than that, you know, there's nothing to worry about. Yeah, it basically is dormant for the winter. And then in spring, I bring it back outside and it resumes growing. There are many times with this Portulacaria afra forest where I've cut the trees back really hard, and I always question, oh, it looks terrible now. Is it ever going to look like a giant African baobab? And, you know, you cut it back hard, it starts to grow in again. Sometimes the hard pruning works, sometimes it doesn't. You always work with what you get. And slowly, you know, the trees start looking better and better, and you start achieving that goal. So that's what this video is all about, is having that goal in mind for your tree. What do I want my tree to look like? What style do I want my tree to be in? And then go about achieving your goal. And that's, you know, for me, that's what bonsai is all about. So that's all for today. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me in the Bonsai Zone.